Hello, I'm the BIOS Chemist and I've got an experiment. I'm combing through the entire PS1 catalog, trying to find the classics, the flops, and everything in between.
This is a game I've been itching to play for a while now. I'm a fan of the Final Fantasy series, and as you all know, Final Fantasy 16 has just come out. What's even better is that while I was working on this video, there seems to have been a leak over at Square saying that Final Fantasy 9 is getting a remake, so it's a pretty good time to be a Square fan, I gotta say. Anyway, I've seen some say that FF9 is their favorite Final Fantasy game. Heck, some even say that it's the best RPG of all time. So does this one live up to the hype? Well, let's find out. We start where all games start, of course, and that's the cover art. 30 seconds, go! This cover art fits right in with the other two games of the PS1 trilogy, with its washed out background and colorful characters in the foreground, thankfully not suffering from that low poly jank of the PS1. The iconic Final Fantasy logo is atop the cover with a giant golden crystal in the space between words, signaling Square's swan song for the PS1. I'm not exactly sure why Amaranth is here on the right side, if the entire cast isn't going to be included, because he's more of a secondary character. I would prefer just the other four, or everyone.
Great job.
Anyway, I think it's a solid cover. How does it compare to the Japanese one? Yeah, this one's obviously better. It has an amazing simplicity that leaves those in the know excited to play, and those uninitiated curious. Something very elegant about this one. So off the bat, the game really impresses with its opening FMV cutscene. This is one of the rare PS1 games where the people don't look absolutely horrifying. Instead, Square gave them a look that was more stylized than Final Fantasy VIII, which tried to be a bit more realistic with its graphics. It's amazing how much the graphics have improved from FF7 in 1997 to this game's release in 2000. I'm going to go into the plot here a bit, try to make it as succinct as possible, but if you want to skip over it, click to this timestamp below. We'll get to the next part of the video. There's a lot to talk about here. We've got chapters below, so if you want to skip around, you can hit that. Hey, real quick note. There was an issue with the recording software, so some of the footage is a bit laggy for the first half of the plot summary here, but it looks pretty good afterwards. Thank you. Alright, so too often do RPGs have slow starts that fail to hook players right away. Final Fantasy IX is the exact opposite of this though, because the introduction here is excellently paced and such an awesome way to start the game. So you begin as Zidane, and the game doesn't waste any time because you get into your first fight almost instantly. It turns out Zidane is a thief, and your first enemy is your boss dressed up as a monster, as a little practice. Your scheme is to capture the princess, while performing a play to distract everybody. An unexpected nice change of pace from other RPGs, I'd say. You quickly transition to playing as the iconic Vivi, who wants to see the play, but has to break into the castle to see it. He's just a poor, lonely boy. Steiner is the next character you meet, the head of the Pluto guards of the castle. He sets out to look for the princess after she goes missing for a bit during the play. Zidane meets Princess Garnet, and turns out she wants to be kidnapped, and she wants to run off to the land of Lindblum. Steiner catches up to them, and Vivi stumbles across their path too, so they're all stuck with each other as the airship takes off away from the kingdom of Alexandria. They quickly get shot down by the queen's forces, not putting her daughter's life in danger or anything, and they crash land into a dangerous forest. This unlikely quartet now has to work together to survive as monsters come and take the princess. Zidane, Steiner, and Vivi go into the forest and search for Garnet and eventually find her. They barely escape. The four protagonists then continue through the ice caves and find a village. Being a princess, Garnet decides to adopt an alias, going by Dagger from now on. In the village, the crew stumbles across a suspicious little factory that seems to be tied to the kingdom of Alexandria, where eggs are being hatched to create dolls that look just like Vivi. The squad fights off many mages, just barely escaping as they take off to go to Lindblum. They seem to be harvesting mist, a mysterious energy source that seems to create some of the monsters in the world, in order to make these dolls. There we talk to Dagger's powerful uncle Regent Sid, a man who, like my friend Gregor Samsa, got turned into a bug. By his wife, of all people, because he cheated on her. Yeah, that's a fitting punishment. It turns out it was he who ordered Dagger to be kidnapped by Zidane, a promise that Sid made to her father before he died. Seeing how things were falling apart in Alexandria, Sid felt there was no other choice. Soon after, a courier from the kingdom of Burmecia comes along asking Sid for help. Zidane, Vivi, and Zidane's friend Freya go off to the kingdom of Burmecia to help. Upon arriving, we find the kingdom destroyed by the Queen of Alexandria. We fight the Queen's elite sword fighter Beatrix and get beaten. We switch to disc 2 and we find that Steiner and Dagger are leaving Lindblum and returning back to Alexandria. However, on the way there, they get captured by the Queen's henchmen. We go back to Zidane, Vivi, and Freya after their defeat. They search for the long-hidden city of Clara. which has been concealed by a massive sandstorm in the desert for many years. Rumors state that the survivors of the Bermesian massacre fled there, so the three make their way to the city to try to find some of the refugees that made it, including Bermesia's king. Misfortune quickly follows their arrival at Clara, though, as the magic stone powering the sandstorm loses its power and makes it dissipate. An invasion commences, and Beatrix makes her way to the cathedral where she steals the stone. The three try to fight her again, but once again, they fail. They do manage to follow the black mages as they start to teleport out of Clara. Meanwhile, we see that Dagger confronts her mother, the queen, about what happened at Bermesia. The queen tries to convince Dagger that they did the attack as an act of defense, but Dagger wasn't buying it. Suddenly, a mysterious figure named Kuja appears and puts Dagger into a trance. Soon after, a ritual was performed, stripping Dagger of all of her powers. The queen takes her airship over Clara and summons the power of Odin, an Eidolon. These Eidolons use some of the most powerful magic in the entire land. The skies open up as the once peaceful town is now completely obliterated. With Dagger's powers drained, the queen orders her to be executed, to even General Beatrix's shock. Freya, Zidane, and Vivi end up finding Steiner, and they go around and find the princess incapacitated, her energy drained. Freya and Steiner stay behind while Vivi, Zidane, and Dagger escape. Outside of Alexandria, Dagger is visited by a specter, Ramach, a summon. He lends Dagger his power, just as the crew sees the queen attack and destroy Lindblom. The three end up meeting a new party member named Quina, who we learn is from the same tribe as Vivi's grandfather. Quina leads the party to an entrance that leads off the continent into the rest of the world. While they go to the outer continent, the group finds a hidden village populated entirely of black mages. These ones, though, are sentient, not like the dolls we had seen before. They describe themselves as having awoken while on the battlefield, managing to run away from Alexandria when they gain consciousness. Here, Vivi starts understanding who he is and what a home might mean to him. The gang continues exploring the continent and finds a mischievous little girl named Aiko, who can, curiously, like Dagger, summon Eidolons. She leads the others in the group to the ruins of a village that used to be filled with summoners. Then they descend to the mystical Lifa tree. It appears as they descend down and down into the borderline Lovecraftian setting that the mist that powers the world is coming from this tree. As they reach the bottom, a godlike creature pops up and details the origins of the mist, how it's a byproduct of the roots of the Lifa tree, and how Kuja is utilizing it to create the black mages. Our four heroes are able to defeat the dark deity and clear up all the mist in the land. Returning to the Eidolon village, Dagger has a vision of horrific fires engulfing it, along with a massive hurricane. It turns out that this is a deep-rooted memory, and that Dagger was actually born in this village, only to be whisked away to Alexandria. We also gain a new party member named Amarant, an agent of the Queen who was hired to defeat us, but we defeat him and he becomes an ally. We return to the Lifa tree to find Kuja. There, he and the Queen have a massive battle against each other, where she eventually summons Bahamut, the strongest Eidolon. Through some great power, Kuja is able to sway Bahamut to do his bidding, and the Queen and her forces get utterly decimated. Kuja flies off, leaving Dagger weeping by her mother's corpse. The game then slows down as Disc 3 begins, and we flash forward to Alexandria, where Dagger is preparing for her coronation. We reunite with most of the cast and see how the love and care many of them have developed for each other is actually starting to create rifts between them, largely because of the lack of communication. A scorned Zidane goes with Vivi, Freya, Amaran, and Aiko to Treno to get away from the city. Zidane enters a Tetramaster tournament and runs into Regent Sid, that bug guy, remember? He says that they were testing an airship that doesn't require mist to run. Aiko interrupts them, with bad news from Alexandria this time. Kuja has begun an attack on the kingdom, summoning Bahamut once again. The crew races back on Sid's airship. Getting there just in time, Aiko is able to fuse her summoning powers with daggers, and they bring forth Alexander, a legendary Eidolon, to protect the entire kingdom. Though they intended to shield the Alexandrians, it turns out that they fell for Kuja's trap. He begins to take control of the legendary Eidolon until we get introduced to Garland, who seems to have power even over Kuja. Zidane is just barely able to rescue Aiko and Dagger before Garland destroys all of Alexandria. Regrouping in Lindblom, everyone discusses what to do next, except for a traumatized Dagger, who loses the ability to speak. The party goes searching for Kuja's hideout when they are all captured by him. He coerces them into finding a magical item on the forgotten continent called the Gulag Stone. The party goes into a futuristic cave with some holograms that weave the yarn of an ancient civilization that was once on the brink of ruin. More on that later again. Descending into the depths of the cave, they find Kuja's toy. They return it to Kuja, but gather everybody from their cells and confront him all together. Kuja darts off on the airship, realizing he doesn't necessarily need an Eidolon to defeat Garland if he has a strong enough soul. They then find Sid's wife locked away, and they all return to Lindblom, where Sid is turned back into a human once again. While captured, Sid's wife Hilda learned that Kuja was not of their world Gaia, but from a different world instead called Terra. These two worlds are allegedly connected by a castle on the Forgotten Continent. Everybody's ready to take off on the airship to confront their destinies, but Dagger first runs to Alexandria. There, viewing the ruins of her once great kingdom, she reconciles her past failures, regains her speech, and symbolically cuts her hair in a very impressive FMV cutscene. They get to that castle and find clues saying that there are 4 points all over the world that need to be destroyed simultaneously. The group splits up into pairs to take on the world. Zidane gets stuck with Quina and has to fight the Guardian of the Earth Shrine, which was probably the hardest boss in the game for me because Quina was super underleveled. Once these 4 points are destroyed, a portal to Terra becomes opened and the group jumps in. And very quickly Zidane learns that he is actually from Terra. Zidane has found his home. Turns out that the species he belongs to are essentially just drones, doing the work for the higher order beings of Terra. In order for all of the Terrans to survive, they need to absorb the power of Garland. Garland is the leader of the Terrans, and his plan from the beginning was to use Zidane, planting him on Gaia. Searching for answers, our protagonist speaks to the mysterious man alone. Garland reveals that Zidane was formed after the creation of Kuja, essentially making them brothers. Kuja was Garland's first agent sent to Gaia to start war. We eventually fight Garland and take the old geezer down, only to be faced by an even stronger Kuja, who has harnessed the souls Garland had collected into an ultimate trance. Garland, dying, reveals to Kuja that he is merely a mortal pawn in all of this, causing Kuja to go on a rampage once he realizes he's just a doll. Like the black mages he's so despised and used so frivolously. Kuja destroys the entire planet of Terra, and everyone barely escapes on the airship. They ride back to Gaia where Kuja looks to wreak more havoc. Here is where we switch to Disc 4. The gang flies the airship to the top of the Life Tree, where a massive battle commences. Sid brings his airship army to help fight against Kuja. Vivi absolutely wrecks the Nova Dragon. Check this clip out, come on. Gotta give him credit. That's my boy. Anyway, we fight in this place called Memoria next, an ethereal realm created from the memories of our characters. A long arduous trek awaits our party as a gauntlet of difficult bosses block their path to Kuja. After many battles though, they finally reach their foe. It's a difficult fight, but Zidane and company are able to overcome the tranced Kuja. But that's not the end. Upon defeating him, an ultimate being named Necron spawns. Overlooking everything, he decides that in order to bring peace to those who are alive, he must kill everyone and end everything. For the entire purpose of life is to die at the end, yet we all fear death. The strength and will to live that our party exhibits, however, leads to Necron's defeat. Back safely on Gaia, the Life Tree begins to crumble. Everyone wants to escape, but something is holding Zidane back. He can sense Kuja is still alive. In an empathetic twist, Zidane goes back in an attempt to save the dying Kuja, realizing that he probably would have acted the exact same way had he been in Kuja's shoes. The Life Tree crumbles around the two of them, leaving their fates unknown. The game skips ahead an undetermined amount of time, showing how each character has been since the adventure. We see Vivi's children, but not him, implying that he's sadly passed away, tying together Final Fantasy IX's themes of life and death. We then see Queen Garnet is ready to watch a play, trying to get over the loss of Zidane, who she presumably hasn't seen for a very long time. We watch the play arrive to its climax as a hooded figure removes his cloak to show Zidane still alive and very well. The game ends on Zidane and Dagger romantically reunited. So this game has an ever-evolving cast of characters. This means that your active party constantly changes, as so must the way you approach combat. Sometimes you'll have 2 sword wielders, 1 healer, 1 magic caster for damage. Other times you'll have 1 swordsman, 2 healers, 1 black magic caster, or a litany of other possible combinations. Some points in the game you'll have to also select 2 separate parties that should go off and fight separately. This really helps the gameplay stay fresh, though you'll want to make sure you don't have any severely underleveled characters. I'm talking to you, Quina. As I mentioned in the plot summary, I got stuck with just Zidane and Quina during the Earth Shrine fight, and since Quina was about 15 levels below Zidane, it was basically a 1v1 for that boss fight. For the most part though, I do think Final Fantasy IX balances itself well. I grinded for maybe a total of 30 minutes. The dialogue throughout the game is largely fun and lighthearted, and the characters all have such distinct personalities. I grew to care for who I would call the main 4 characters of Zidane, Vivi, Dagger, and Steiner. I did find the others enjoyable too, with Freya and Aiko being very endearing characters. Zidane's sort of our lead. He's a cocky ladies' man, an adventurous thief, and a loyal friend. Vivi's a charming young black mage who, after losing his grandfather, is really just trying to find a place where he belongs in this world. Dagger is at first a princess who was rather sheltered from the lives of commoners, but she develops into a strong leader after suffering through trauma of losing many loved ones. Steiner, he reminds me of Buzz Lightyear. He's kind of a hardo who just wants to do his job and take care of those close to him, but he has a heart of gold. He even kind of looks like Buzz.
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity.
Freya was Zidane's friend from his thieving days. She was also a likable protagonist, though her spotlight was really only in the first third of the game. After that, she kind of falls to the wayside and stayed more quiet, though very useful. The little girl Aiko is a strong magic caster and summoner who helps Dagger and Zidane grow as characters. The other two characters in our party are Quina and Amarith. I don't know how that's how I say it. I don't know. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. There's a lot of weird names in this game. I could take or leave them. They aren't terrible, but that connection just didn't grow for me. Queen is more of a comedy character whose primary objective is just finding and eating food. Amarith is Zidane's foil in a lot of ways. He's like a lone wolf, quiet bad boy who doesn't seem to get the point of working in a team. He has a bit of change of heart after Zidane tries to rescue him, however. This ensemble cast has wonderful chemistry with each other, especially since many of the characters butt heads throughout parts of the journey. They're not just all lovey-dovey all the time. The most poignant scene of the game for me was when once fearful Vivi went off on his own to return to his grandfather's house. While there, he ruminates on his time with his late grandfather, and though it was a short scene, it really connected with me. The young black mage reflects on who he is throughout the game, especially since there are so many black mage drones that appear to be mindless, violent automatons. Zidane too has a poignant moment with Dagger, where he confesses that all he's ever really wanted was to learn where he came from, and thus learn who he is. Despite this, he feels some conflict. Though he longs for those type of answers, he's found a home for himself, so does where he come from really even matter? By the end of the game, Zidane learns that Terra is his true home, which again brings up the conflicted feelings inside of him. Can he really be loyal to his Gaian family if he is of Terran blood? And Dagger, we can't forget about her. She of course faces the trauma of not only being betrayed and sentenced to death by her mother, but then losing her mother, and on top of that, becoming a leader and failing to protect everyone in her kingdom beneath her wing. She becomes petrified with shock, losing the ability to speak. This interestingly even impacts how useful she is during the battles, as when she's traumatized, she has a high chance of failing her next move. These are three of the many deep, often dark themes of Final Fantasy IX. As you've been able to see, of course, the game is very cartoony in its visuals, so the juxtaposition between the cartoony, chibi graphics and its difficult themes, which also include suicide, guilt, grief, and existentialism, make Final Fantasy IX really stand out amongst others. So the story is solid, but this is a game after all, so how's the gameplay? Okay. Well, FF9 sticks pretty closely to the formula laid down by previous Final Fantasies, but does deviate in some ways, as you might expect. It keeps the classic active time battle system, introduced way back in Final Fantasy IV, where each player can only perform their turn once. This bar right here on the screen fills up. If you're too slow though, the enemy can sneak a turn in, so you gotta think quickly. Along with ATBs, 9 also introduces ATEs. These are active time events. They don't have much bearing on the gameplay. Instead, they're sort of a storytelling device that lets us cut away, see what's going on in a different part of the world for a little bit. It's an interesting way to keep the game focused on the main plot while also informing us about things happening in our periphery. It does feel a little intrusive at some points though, where I just wanted to stick with the main plot. But in those moments I felt obligated to stop and see everything that I could, so But for the most part, I really enjoyed it. Trance is an important aspect of this game's battle system. Similar to the limit breaks in Final Fantasy VII, you charge this up over time whenever your character gets hit. Unlike the limit breaks though, the trance activates automatically when you fill the bar. When this happens, your character changes their appearance, becomes temporarily stronger, and even unlocks some new moves in some cases, until that bar runs out. This is a fun system that adds an aspect of suspense to the game. Sometimes you just need that bar to fill up, so when you finally hit it, it's very, very satisfying. Other times though, it can be frustrating. The bar can be activated at the end of a random encounter that you were easily going to win, so you effectively just wasted it. It's a decent addition to the combat that I'm glad is there, but I do think that the limit breaks were a bit more fun, especially since they allow you to customize that a little bit. Alright, abilities are the last big aspect of gameplay that we'll discuss here. So in Final Fantasy IX, you can equip weapons and gear just like in every other RPG. Duh. In this game though, each item has certain abilities attached to them. You have to have said items equipped in order to equip the ability that follows it until a certain point. You see, once you gain enough AP, which is earned from winning battles just like XP is, you unlock the chance to use the ability without having that gear equipped, meaning that as you progress throughout the game, each character has abilities stacked onto them. Abilities range from auto-reviving you upon getting KO'd, to increasing your health and magic, to immunity from sleep, amongst a ton of other things. This leads to some interesting decision making every once in a while. Sometimes I had to forgo equipping a stronger weapon for a little bit so that I could unlock a good ability that was attached to a weaker weapon. It's a little similar to Final Fantasy VI's method of unlocking summons if you're familiar with that. There isn't complete flexibility here since not everyone is able to use the abilities that is attached to each item. This isn't necessarily a bad thing since characters in FF9 are pretty structured. It makes sense that the game makers wanted to have a bit more control over who could do what. This may not seem like the best system for players who want to have complete control over everything, but it really incentivizes you to search constantly for new items. There are plenty of fun builds that are possible here. For example, I gave Vivi the auto potion ability because he's a character that doesn't have a ton of health. So every time he got hit, he would automatically heal himself with a small potion. I then also gave him the auto regen ability so that he would continuously regain health throughout the battle. This made Vivi a little bit of a tank, which is kind of cool since he's such a strong magic wielder. Presentation here is wicked good. There's plenty of FMVs that look really good even now because of the stylized art direction. Square also used their beautiful pre-rendered backgrounds for each screen other than the overworld. The use of the static images is also kept fresh though by adding things like dynamic camera angles and panning around the pre-rendered photos, occasionally having title cards too for each new area that you go into. I really enjoy how much personality the characters have conveyed through the animations both in battle and in overworld maps. It really makes them feel alive, and it's that type of attention to detail that makes Final Fantasy such a great series. The settings for each battle are also really fleshed out, so it really feels like you're kind of in there. The environments are really detailed when you're fighting. Battles also showcase how much the character models have progressed. Way back in Final Fantasy VII, enemies would appear rather angular and often kind of obscure. It was kind of hard to tell what they were going for. As for the music, it may not be my favorite from Square, but it's very good still. The soundtrack really is the game's ambiance with many emotional pieces, but I don't see myself humming along to many of the melodies as I do with other games from Square like Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy VI. I think that's where Square's auditory pinnacle was, in my opinion. That being said, there are some standout tracks that really work well to build a melancholic tone that fits the themes of life and death. Garnet's song is one that is played at particularly poignant points of the story, a strong addition to any scene it's played in. Have a listen here. Even the overworld theme I find to have a certain sadness behind the layers of adventure that are more obvious to the ear. Alright, this is the part of the show where we discuss a name from the credits and see where they are now. There are a ton of influential people who worked on Final Fantasy IX, but today we're going to talk about the producer, Hironobu Sakaguchi. This is the guy who created Final Fantasy way back in 1987, still working on the franchise over a decade later when Final Fantasy IX was released. Though he's billed as a producer here, he's also been a director and a writer throughout his career. While at Square, he oversaw many games outside of the mainline Final Fantasy games, including the Chocobo series, Parasite Eve, the Chrono games, Xenogears, and even Rad Racer on the NES. Yeah, that one. He ended up leaving Square in the early 2000s to start his own studio called Mistwalker. They made some games for the 360 and Wii before hopping onto the mobile game bandwagon with what was apparently a very successful franchise in the Terra Battle games. That's news to me, never heard of him. Sakaguchi has had an illustrious career with many classics under his belt that we'll be checking out in this series eventually. If you enjoy any type of RPG elements in your video games, you partially have Sakaguchi to thank. So, does it live up to the hype? Is this the best Final Fantasy game? Well, in my heart of hearts, I can't say that this is my favorite FF game. I think that honor still belongs to 6, but don't get me wrong, this is still an excellent JRPG that really had me invested throughout, which is something rare I'd say in a lot of RPGs because they can be very long games. Never did this game feel like it was dragging. The pace was impeccable, really. The graphics were solid, especially for the late days of the PS1. The characters were moving, and it has fun gameplay for those of us who appreciate the old school turn-based stuff. I just think that 6 is a bit stronger with a cast of characters slightly better, music that's slightly better, and a world that I think I appreciate more personally. That being said, FF9 is a must-play for any JRPG fan, though this should not be where you start playing your Final Fantasy games. I think what really makes this installment special is being able to put it in the context of when it was made. The 3 games in the series before this release really started to stray away from the fantasy aspects of the series, and after 9, that fantasy setting has largely disappeared from FF for the most part. This was like a swan song for both the PS1 era of Final Fantasy and what could be considered the cutoff for old school Final Fantasy as things really began to change with 10. 9 also incorporates a litany of references to prior games, like, for example, name-dropping many of the former protagonists like Squall, Cloud, and Terra, and bringing back important elements from the first games like Black Mages and Crystals. Here's hoping that the new release of Final Fantasy XVI is just as good a game as 9 was. I've got high hopes for it. Let me know down in the comments what PS1 game I should tackle next. Not an RPG for a while because I'm kinda tired out after this one. If you remember though, we had a poll the last few videos on what my next game should be, and you guys have spoken. With 60% of the vote, the clear winner was FIFA 97. We'll be playing some football for game number 6. Till then, I'll see ya. Have a Final Fantasy of a day, I don't know.